Hi, Group D. This is Brendan Howard. I'm sharing with you the article that I read, Young People's Perceptions and Experiences of Leaving High School Early and Exploration by Trish Lee and Laura Breen. In this article, I first thought I would share with you a picture, or sort of a picture of what the article looked like here from what I downloaded off of our Walden's library. The problem statement for this article, for these two, there is a problem with understanding why students drop out from school and understanding these perceptions and experiences based off of school context. The overall qualitative design that was used for this research study, the methodology was a constructionist grounded theory. And what that is exactly, this method, it was first introduced by Glaser and Strauss in 1967, and it's an inductive stance which is used and meaning is derived from the data. So in other words, the theory comes from, or in other words, is grounded in the data, and so that's where the name comes from. The purpose of this study, it was to explore the experiences and perceptions of school context from the viewpoint of young adults who had left school early. The guiding questions for this study, there were three. First, it was what was the experience of school for young people who left school early? Two, how did the school context impact their well-being? And three, how was their decision to leave school early impacted on their well-being? The sample and sampling techniques that were used for this study, first off, there was an attempt that was to recruit participants through an advertisement in the local newspaper, but nobody volunteered from that. So the leading author, or the primary author for this article, decided to use the snowball sampling method, and they recruited participants through social networking. The sample size for this study was 12 young adults, and they were from ages of 16 to 19 years old who had left school early. The different data collection techniques that were used, there was only one data collection technique, and that was using interviews. So that was the primary source for the data. First off, consent was gathered. Secondly, the participants were then briefed before the interview. The interviews were then tape recorded, and these interviews lasted from 30 to 40 minutes. The interviews were then transcribed, and handwritten notes were also used while the interviews were being completed. And at the completion, participants were briefed again and given the chance to ask some questions. And finally, the participants were also given a small gift for their participation. Was the data collection appropriate for this study? Grounded theory, it does use interviews. I can also use field notes, documents to compare other incidents or other sets of data. Field notes, or the documentation, could also have been used in this instance to help categorize. So the interviews that were conducted in Lee and Brent's study, I did find to be appropriate, being in accordance with what Miriam says about grounded theory. However, though, grounded theory, it should also use a variety of methods to collect data. So for the data analysis portion, interviews were compared and then coded and categorized. The questions were ordered, and then a matrix was developed and used to reduce the data and help develop significant themes. And after the categories were made, they were then linked to the 6 C's. The 6 C's, what they are causes, context, contingencies, consequences, covariances, and conditions. What these are, causes, in other words, is explanations. Context is simple meaning for wider settings. Contingencies have to deal with direction of relationships. The consequences have to deal with the different outcomes. Covariances is the difference between concepts versus variables. And of course, conditions has to deal with the occurrence of the phenomenon. So was this a thematic or an analytical analysis? Well, thematic analysis reports patterns or themes within data. So in grounded theory, 3 sets of coding are often used to help break down and analyze the original data. And these 3 are, well, first is open coding, then there is axial coding, and there is selective coding. So was thematic or analytic analysis used? There's no real clear analytical approach that's used in this study. Coding was used, but they don't state if they used all 3 types or just one type of coding. Thematic analysis does take place because they look for common themes. And both the researchers, they do independently review the data, and they make interpretations based off that data. Changes are then made in there to ensure that the themes are corroborated with the participants' responses. So, was the analytical approach appropriate for this? Well, Miriam, she just suggests that grounded theory begins with categories which help develop properties which also help develop a hypothesis. So in other instances, the three phases of coding are also used to help develop the grounded theory. And using both a thematic and analytical analysis gives a well-rounded analysis of a study. In this study, it's kind of hard to pick out if it was totally appropriate, but it seems the coding and the categories that were made seem to fit in with an appropriate approach for analytical. Were there ethical issues in the study? I think there were some possible ethical issues. First off, participants were recruited through the primary author's social networks. That could be considered, possibly potentially have some ethical issues going on there with how participants were recruited. Each participant received a gift for participation. The type of gift is not disclosed. Was the same gift given? Was there different gifts given? Was something else promised to the participants beforehand? We don't know if any of that happened. Debriefing should include time for the participants to ask questions or make comments. Debriefing is not really mentioned in the process of this research and during the interviews. And the best thing that a researcher can do for a qualitative study is to examine his or her own philosophies and just be aware of any possible ethical issues that might come up during the interviewing and the research process, just to make sure they take out any kind of bias. Lee and Bryn's study, they don't make mention of any potential bias that they might have had beforehand. So those all could be potential ethical issues for the study. As far as validity goes, they do have some potential validity issues. First off, there's no triangulation mentioned in the article. All the interviews were conducted solely by the primary author. Potentially, there might be another problem with having adequate time to collect the data. It did say the interviews were from 30 to 40 minutes long. I don't know. I think this could be a potential to make it difficult to have to obtain the full picture of why they dropped out of school. Also, the interview questions were not predetermined. That was definitely something that I found to be a little odd, that they didn't already have the interview questions set before they conducted the interview. The wording and details in the questions were not all the same when the interviews were conducted, so this could bring into question the credibility and the validity for the questions being asked by the interviewers to the interviewees. And also respondent validation and member checks. There's no real reference if this was they were used or not. And finally, however, when there was a problem with one of the taped interviews, handwritten notes were used to counteract any potential errors. Another thing in the article, there's no section or special mention about validity, so that does come into question if the authors did think about validity for this article. Here are the references that were used. Group D, thanks for listening and watching my little presentation. I look forward to reading through your comments and responding back. Thank you.